like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. We're diving into something today that feels a lot like, a high-stakes game of chess. But instead of kings and queens, we're talking about the U.S. and China battling it out over, well, the future of technology.
Yeah, it's fascinating, really, to watch this unfold in real time, almost like a global game of economic chicken.
Exactly. And the latest move in this game is China's decision to restrict exports of some really critical materials. And we're here to try and figure out what it all means.
Well, essentially what we're seeing is China responding to the U.S.'s efforts to, limit their access to advanced technology, in particular things like semiconductors.
Right. So we're talking about chips, the brains behind everything from our smartphones to, even military hardware.
Exactly. And the timing here is interesting. It's December 3rd, 2024, and Beijing's Commerce Ministry announces they're putting the brakes on exports of gallium, germanium, and antimony.
Gallium, germanium, antimony. Now, to a lot of people, those might sound like elements from a chemistry textbook.
Right. Definitely not household names.
But trust me, these materials are suddenly front and center in this whole tech showdown.
Yeah, and for good reason. They're essential for manufacturing semiconductors, which, as you mentioned, are found in just about everything these days. Mobile devices, solar panels, even military tech.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. Why are these materials, particularly gallium, so crucial?
Well, gallium, for instance, is a key ingredient in high-bandwidth memory chips.
High-bandwidth memory chips.
Yeah, these are the chips that are driving the performance of things like data centers and AI applications, all those cutting-edge technologies that are really reshaping our world.
So basically it sounds like China's saying, look, if you want to play hardball with tech restrictions, well, we have some leverage of our own.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
And, while both countries are kind of framing their actions in terms of national security.
Well, is that national security card?
It's pretty clear that this is ultimately a battle of control over the future of technology. And, of course, all the economic and geopolitical power that comes with it.
Right. And to make things even more interesting, all of this is happening while the U.S. is in the process of adding more Chinese companies to their entity list, which I guess basically prevents them from acquiring certain American technologies, right?
Right. Particularly technologies related to chip making.
So just to clarify for our listeners, the entity list is basically a blacklist.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way for the U.S. to restrict specific companies from accessing U.S.-made technology.
So it really does feel like a tit-for-tat situation,
Yeah, definitely an escalation of tensions.
But what does this actually mean for the U.S.? Practically speaking, are we talking about empty shelves or, skyrocketing prices?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine you're trying to bake a cake, but you don't have any flour.
Okay, no flour for my cake.
That's kind of the challenge the world faces trying to produce high-tech products without these materials from China. They produce 98% of the world's gallium and 60% of its germanium.
Wow, 98%. That's a pretty significant chunk.
It is. And to put that into perspective, China exported 23 metric tons of gallium in 2022 alone.
23 metric tons.
Just gallium. And all of that went into things like semiconductors, lasers, LEDs, you name it.
So the U.S. relies on China for about half of its supply.
At least, yeah. And while the U.S. does have untapped deposits of these materials.
Untapped meaning there's potential there, but...
Yeah, potential, but no active mining operations within the U.S. at the moment.
So they're stuck relying on China, which I guess leaves them vulnerable both in terms of supply and also potential price hikes.
Exactly. Those sudden price increases are what we call price shocks. And they can really disrupt industries, even entire economies. And we're already seeing this play out with antimony, another one of the restricted minerals. Its price has more than doubled this year.
Antimony. Now, I know that's used in a lot of things, right? From flame retardants to...
Yeah, all sorts of things. And it's also crucial for some military applications, like night vision goggles.
Speaking of which, doesn't President Biden's export controls also impact companies in other countries? Places like Japan, South Korea... Singapore, they rely on U.S. technology to some degree too, right?
That's right. Biden's export controls have kind of created this ripple effect impacting companies in allied nations who are now caught in the crossfire of this escalating tech war.
It's like the whole world is getting pulled into this.
In a way, yeah. And for a while, it seemed like China was hesitant to retaliate, maybe to protect their own rapidly developing tech industries.
So what changed? Why are they taking such a strong stance now?
Well, this recent move suggests a shift in strategy. It seems China is signaling that they are willing to use their dominance in these critical materials as leverage.
And it looks like they have a lot of support at home, too, right? I mean, Chinese industry groups have come out in support of the government's decision, arguing that U.S. actions are disrupting the global supply chain and ultimately harming American companies as well.
And they're not mincing words either.
The China Semiconductor Industry Association even went so far as to say that U.S. chips are no longer safe and reliable, which is a pretty bold statement coming from them.
Yeah, it seems like a direct challenge to American dominance in the tech sector.
Like they're flipping the script and saying, you thought you controlled the global tech landscape, but we have a say in this now, too.
Exactly. And they're backing up their words with actions. Restricting the export of these vital materials is a very real way for them to exert their influence and shake things up.
It's starting to feel like a high-stakes game of chicken with each side trying to outmaneuver the other, but the risk of a collision, it just keeps growing.
And the stakes are incredibly high. I mean, the outcome of this tech rivalry will have a ripple effect across the entire world, impacting everything from the global economy and international security to the future of innovation itself.
So is this it? Is this the start of a full-blown tech Cold War with the world splitting into two opposing sides?
It's too early to say for certain, but this is definitely a major escalation of tensions.
It's a wake-up call for sure, for everyone involved. I mean, we can't just take globalization for granted anymore. We can't assume that access to these critical materials will always be easy or cheap. And we have to be prepared for a future where technology plays an even greater role in the struggle for global dominance.
You know, that article we were discussing earlier, it actually called the U.S. actions malicious suppression and claimed it was harmful to everyone involved.
Wow, it seems like both sides are really digging in here, each convinced of their own righteousness.
And that's perhaps the most troubling aspect of this whole situation. When communication breaks down and distrust reigns supreme, finding common ground and de-escalating the situation becomes a much more difficult task.
So where do we go from here? What happens next in this global tech tug of war?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but there are a few potential outcomes that seem likely. Firstly, we can probably expect the prices of these key materials to become even more volatile.
Right. That spike in antimony prices is probably just the beginning.
Exactly. And those price fluctuations will likely cascade through various industries, potentially leading to increased costs for consumer electronics, production delays, even shortages of certain products.
So our next smartphone could get even pricier.
It's definitely a possibility. We might also see a global shift in investment, with countries and companies trying to secure their own supplies of these critical materials outside of China.
So more mining operations here in the U.S. maybe.
Right.
Or partnerships with other countries that have reserves of these minerals.
Exactly. And it's also possible that this situation could actually accelerate the development of alternative technologies.
Oh, interesting. So if gallium, for example, becomes too scarce and expensive, it might push researchers to find substitute materials that can perform similar functions.
Exactly. Necessity is the mother of invention, right?
That's what they say.
This kind of pressure can often lead to breakthroughs that might not have happened otherwise.
That's true. But on the other hand, there's also the risk that this tech rivalry could result in a more fragmented world. We could end up with two separate tech ecosystems, one led by the U.S. and the other by China, each developing along different technological paths.
That would be the worst-case scenario, of course. But it is a possibility we need to consider.
It's a lot to think about. This whole situation really highlights the fact that technology is never truly neutral. It's always intertwined with political and economic systems.
And as those systems become more competitive and adversarial, well, we can expect to see technology increasingly weaponized in that struggle.
It really makes you think about how interconnected the world has become. I mean, for decades, we've relied on these complex global supply chains.
Right, everyone's specializing in something different.
And we all just kind of got used to this idea that we could get anything we wanted from anywhere at any time.
Instant gratification on a global scale.
Exactly. But this situation with China and these materials, it really shows just how fragile that system can be.
Especially when geopolitics enters the picture.
Yeah.
Things get complicated quickly.
It's like we all woke up one morning and realized, hey, China basically has a monopoly on these essential materials, and they're not afraid to use that to their advantage.
It's a wake-up call for sure, not just for the U.S., but for the entire world.
So what do we do? Do countries need to rethink their entire approach to supply chains, diversify their sources, maybe even invest in domestic production?
Those are definitely some of the options on the table.
Yeah.
But it's easier said than done.
Oh, I can imagine. Mining and processing these materials is no walk in the park.
Exactly. It's a complex process. It's expensive. And it often comes with its own set of environmental challenges.
So there are no easy answers here.
Not really. This situation really highlights the potential downsides of relying so heavily on globalization.
And it's not just about economic vulnerability either. We talked about how crucial these materials are for military technology, too.
Right, that's a whole other layer of complexity to this.
It makes you wonder if this could even spark some kind of arms race, with countries scrambling to secure their own supplies.
It's not out of the realm of possibility. We've seen it happen before. Throughout history, when national security is perceived to be at stake, governments tend to prioritize it above all else.
Which is what makes this whole thing so unsettling. It's not just about having the latest gadgets or the fastest internet speeds anymore.
It's about something much bigger, the balance of power in the 21st century.
And that balance is definitely shifting China's rise as a technological and economic powerhouse. I mean, it's undeniable at this point.
And their willingness to assert themselves on the global stage, that's becoming increasingly clear too.
This export restriction on those materials, it's just the latest example, but it's a significant one.
It shows they're not afraid to play hardball. And remember that quote from the China Semiconductor Industry Association?
The one where they said U.S. chips are no longer safe and reliable.
Exactly. It's a direct challenge to America's long-held dominance in technology.
It's like they're saying, yeah, you thought you were in control, but we have a say in this now, too.
And they're not just talking. They're backing it up with concrete actions.
Actions that have the potential to disrupt global supply chains, send prices soaring, and who knows what else.
It's a high-stakes game of chicken, for sure. And right now it feels like both sides are accelerating.
So what happens next? I mean, where do we go from here?
Well, it's tough to say for certain, but we can probably expect a few things to happen. Firstly, those prices for those key materials, they're likely going to keep fluctuating.
Yeah, that spike in antimony prices, that was probably just a taste of things to come.
Right. And those fluctuations, they're going to have a ripple effect across industries.
Yeah.
Potentially leading to more expensive electronics production delays, maybe even shortages of certain products.
So basically everything's going to get more expensive and harder to get.
It's a real possibility. We might also see a shift in global investment, with countries and companies scrambling to secure their own sources of these materials outside of China.
Right. So maybe we'll see more mining operations opening up in the U.S. or more partnerships with other countries that have reserves of these minerals.
Exactly. And there's also a chance that this whole situation could actually spur innovation and the development of alternative technologies.
Oh, that's interesting. So basically, if those materials from China become too expensive or difficult to obtain, companies might start looking for other options.
Precisely. Necessity is the mother of invention, after all.
That's what they say. But on the other hand, this whole tech rivalry could also lead to a more fragmented world, right? I mean, what if we end up with two completely separate tech ecosystems, one led by the U.S., the other by China?
That's definitely a risk, something we need to be mindful of. It would create all sorts of compatibility issues and could potentially even stifle innovation.
Imagine a world where your phone and your laptop can't even communicate with each other because they're based on totally different technologies.
It's not a future anyone wants to see. But it's a possibility we need to consider.
This whole situation really underscores how important it is to think critically about technology and its impact on the world.
It's not just about cool gadgets and faster internet speeds anymore. Technology is increasingly intertwined with geopolitics and global power dynamics.
And as this tech rivalry between the U.S. and China continues to heat up, well, the stakes are only going to get higher.
It's a complex situation with no easy answers. But one thing's for sure, the choices we made today about technology and globalization, they're going to have a profound impact on the world of tomorrow.
So for our listeners out there, I mean, what does all of this actually mean? It seems like a lot of high-level political maneuvering, but how could this tech war trickle down and impact everyday life?
Well, one of the most direct impacts could be on the price of the devices we use every day. Things like smartphones and laptops, they could become more expensive as the cost of those key materials goes up. And we could also see delays in getting the latest gadgets if production gets slowed down by material shortages. So it's not just about the price tag, but also about access to the technology we've come to rely on.
Exactly. And it's not just about consumer tech either. Remember, those materials are also essential for renewable energy medical equipment, whole range of industries.
Right. So this situation has the potential to impact a lot of different areas.
And a lot of innovations that are pretty crucial for our future.
It almost feels like we're at a crossroads here. I mean, do we try to go back to the way things were, with globalized supply chains? Or do we move towards something completely different, maybe even a world with separate tech ecosystems?
That's the big question, isn't it? And there are no easy answers. Reshoring production and diversifying supply chains, I mean, that would be a huge undertaking. It's not even clear if it's possible to completely decouple from China at this point.
On the other hand, a world with two separate tech ecosystems, one led by the US and the other by China, I mean, that could lead to all sorts of problems.
Yeah, you'd have compatibility issues, potentially stifled innovation. Imagine a world where your phone can't connect to your laptop because they're based on totally different technologies.
That's a scenario we want to avoid if possible. But this situation, I think it's a good opportunity for us to really think critically about the future we're building.
Right. We can't just assume that technological progress will continue on the same path it has been on.
We need to be aware of these geopolitical forces that are at play.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What can they do in light of all of this?
Well, I think the most important thing is to stay informed and engaged. Pay attention to how governments and companies respond to this evolving situation. Think critically about the technology you use and where it comes from. Don't be afraid to ask questions and voice your concerns.
This is a complex issue. It's not going away anytime soon, and it's something that we all need to be thinking about and talking about.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth emphasizing that this isn't just a story about China and the US. It's a story about globalization, about innovation, about the choices we make as a global society, about the future of technology. The decisions that are made today will have consequences for years to come, and they'll impact everyone on the planet. So stay curious, stay informed, stay engaged, because the future is yet to be written.
Well said. That's it for today's deep dive. We hope this exploration of China's countermove in the chip war has given you all some food for thought. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with another deep dive into the most fascinating and challenging issues of our time.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.